an exciting 90-minute London derby at the Emirates, so Arsenal and Chelsea both walk away with a point, each scoring a goal for their own. So, let's talk about it. An Arsenal-Chelsea clash is always going to be one of the most anticipated European clashes, but also this is taking place as the January transfer window's open. This was right after the break and the first 2023 game for both clubs, and so the story was great for the kickoff of this game. We've already had our Wolfsburg versus Bayern Munich. We've had our Clásicos. It was finally time to see Arsenal take on Chelsea this part of the season. Interestingly, both London clubs came out with a 4-2-3-1 formation. However, they were kind of diverting into a 4-4-2, 4-3-3 throughout the majority of the game. No massive surprises for what Arsenal came up with. It was pretty much the best starting 11 they can put together given the injuries that they're dealing with. Katie McCabe was on the bench as well as the 3 new signings that they have done in the January window. For Chelsea, they had Musovic start ahead of Ann-Katrin Berger, which I don't think was a big surprise, but also I think probably was one of the best decisions that Emma Hayes made for this starting 11. Fleming started ahead of Frank Kirby, who apparently picked up a small knock in training and wasn't fully fit to start. Something to have in mind is that Niamh Charles did start ahead of Yves Perisset, which I think is an interesting choice, and I think ponders a very good question of who starts ahead of who. Let's start off by talking about the home side here, Arsenal. I think this game, timing-wise, was probably not the most comfortable for them, given the injuries that they had and how active they should have been in the transfer window and have been so far. The substitutions that Emma Hayes was able to make throughout the game were kind of where the momentum started shifting for Chelsea. Arsenal didn't necessarily have the luxury. 4 of the players on the bench had just joined the squad only a few days prior to this game kicking off, and so training-wise and just adapting to the players and even building chemistry to that squad again around them probably was not enough time at all to even get them into a game, a very crucial game. This was going to be something that they were going to deal regardless of who they faced after the break. It just happened to be Chelsea, which is probably not who they would have wanted. But even with that being said, this game could have been won by Arsenal. And I say this as a neutral. I think they somewhat deserved to walk away with more than a point. They had some really nice build-up work. The midfield was outstanding today, despite Leah Volti being slightly more sloppier than she usually would. But I think it's purely because she was matched up with Erin Cuthbert. And I think any midfielder who's matched up with Erin Cuthbert is not going to have the best game. Speaking of, I thought that was an incredible battle because Leah Volti and Erin Cuthbert have probably the most polar opposite styles of football and how they manage the midfield, and seeing them go head to head was very, very fun. They got the ball into the final third. It was decent, but it was the finishing that I think really let them down. They hit the bar. They had some really close shots, who I think Musovic did really well handling herself today, especially given the first half she had the sun in her eye, which a lot of people can be like, well, that's not a disadvantage. I think it is a bit of a disadvantage if you're trying to block some shots and you have the sun shining straight into you. So Musovic, I thought, had a really great game, but there was a lack of urgency, and I would say kind of slow ball hold up that when you're playing against Chelsea, you need to be the fastest you could be. And I'm not sure if this is something that Jonas specifically stressed on don't rush it, be calm. It could have been part of the game plan. But with how well they were pressing, I think this is probably some of the best Arsenal pressing that we have seen against Chelsea in a very long time. You're setting yourself up for success when you press that well, and when you get the ball in such dangerous positions, you have to be urgent and you have to finish. Caitlin Ford had a great game. I don't think there was many situations where I looked and I was like, oh, she should have passed there, she should have been in the box. I think her position on and off the ball was outstanding today. Very unlucky not to get a goal of her own. Lena Hurting had quite a decent game. She was pressing really well again. I think the front 3 were outstanding on their pressing work. A few touches she could have buried, and probably 1 or 2 kind of passes that she could have made that could have ended in a goal. Went in as the main striker, so obviously a lot of pressure was on her to secure some of the goals, and simply not too good enough. And I say this is a neutral for this game, but also a big Stina fan in terms of I've seen how good she is with the Swedish team and with Häcken. She plays too hesitant and too scared to play a ball, which I frankly can't get my head around because on various situations she's had multiple players around her and multiple really good opening and options, and just simply doesn't see those pockets and isn't able to move that ball into that pocket. But it's the pace of how she moves the ball, it's the pace of how she holds up the ball that is too slow for this game. And this can come off as harsh because she can score and she does score, but that happens usually against the middle table teams. But when you're competing for the title, you need to be showing up against Chelsea, against Manchester United. Those big games, especially when Viviana Miedema and Beth Mead are both out. Jonas Eidevall has been very vocal on getting a number 9, on getting a striker, that kind of natural killer finisher this window. There's been rumors around Chloe Lacasse. I think that is an incredible option. People may be sleeping on her. I, as a Canadian, have been following her for a long time. I was able to watch her play live. She's been absolutely killing it at Benfica and the Champions League. 5 goals. That is some pretty good numbers. Again, in their group, they had Bayern Munich and Barcelona, so not easy opposition she's coming up against. With that being said, there was plenty of positives to take away, and really you could say this was a good performance by Arsenal. Freedom Onum, the way she alternates with the 3 forwards is very hard to mark and very hard to predict. When Chelsea was pressing in a 4-4-2 position, the way Frida Manen was looping around, it made them look a lot more flat-footed than they actually are. He cuts through the left side of the field very often, combining really nicely with Caitlin Ford, but what that usually does is, though, it pulls some midfielders with her laterally, which exposes the defense line of Chelsea, because now you've got centre-backs worrying about that, and they have to pull in forward, and then the fullback is then sitting there having to worry about the flank, but also what's behind them, which again was exposed multiple times. This is not the clearest of images, but this is exactly what Frida Manen did over and over and over again, is that pulling both the midfielders right behind her, as you can see here. When she wants to take a shot and is looking very dangerous, she's pulling both center backs in with her. What you can see here is it puts Arsenal at an advantage of a 2 versus 3 position. Ford on the side here is empty. Look at how much space she could have exposed if she was actually to get the ball. And this isn't me saying that she should have gone the ball and Frida couldn't shoot, because Frida can shoot from far away and she saw the opportunity, so why not take it? So this isn't me saying Frida should have passed the ball. Again, she's pulled in the fullbacks to worry about moving in forward. These pockets here, so wide open. With Chelsea, far, far from it. This is where Chelsea's fullback is, right? You can tell they're worried about moving into the middle to cover what the center backs did, but also they have to worry about their wingers. Emma Hayes was able to correct this going into the second half. They were able to move into more of a 3-5-2 shape and cover that extra body in the midfield to suppress Frida from actually pulling into that and pulling as many bodies as she was able to. Laura Wienreuther, outstanding game. For me, she was the player of the match. Why, you may ask? Because Gura Reiten has been an absolute nightmare. She's been tearing up the WSL and the Champions League like nobody else. Now, how many times did you see Gura Reiten in a dangerous position or in a position to start an attack or assist? You can probably count that on your hand, because Gura Reiten is a tough task. There's not many fullbacks who can catch her, and credit to Gura, because she, again, is a nightmare to cover her movement. Now, speaking of the penalty that they had, if we're going to be completely honest here, it was not a penalty. Watching the foul over and over again, it was clearly out of the box. One could argue maybe it wasn't a foul. I would say it was a good enough challenge to be a foul, but certainly not in the box and certainly not a penalty. Arsenal wasn't in momentum. They were applying a ton of pressure, and when you apply pressure, you're going to be caught up in a position where the referee could award you something, and I think that probably exactly what happened for Arsenal here. However, I should say that games like this, big title deciders, especially in a men's stadium, the Emirates does have all the VAR technology and the VAR room and everything that a VAR could need. A game like this should have VAR regardless. We could talk about how the entire WSL should have a VAR, but we need to start off baby steps, and I think big title deciders like this should have a VAR regardless of what the circumstances are. Moved well in the back, was able to maneuver the midfield Arsenal's way, pressed really well. It was just simply they were lacking that final third. Moving on to Chelsea, they obviously did not have the best of games. Emma Hayes said it herself, their attacking display was woeful, and I quote, but I actually don't think the attacking part was the worst part of it. Their midfield is in big trouble. Jessie Fleming, and I am a huge Jessie Fleming fan, was pretty much invisible. And I would go as far as she hasn't quite found her feet this season, which is kind of disappointing for a player. Everybody knows the quality Fleming could offer. She just signed a new contract in the winter. She's staying. She's a blue for a few years, but she hasn't been able to find her feet this season, and I'm not quite sure why. Understandably, the midfield has not been the most consistent in the last few games, but that's purely because the different players that they're able to put in that midfield and rotate between them. Pernilla Harder is also out. She's missed a few games. That most certainly changes how Emma Hayes approaches the game and how they want to attack. So that could be part of the reason why Fleming hasn't found her feet just yet. But she was pretty much invisible today. It almost looked like Chelsea was playing with a man down. And I hate to put it on Fleming, but she didn't have the best game. Like I previously mentioned, when they were trying to press Arsenal in a 4-4-2, it looked like Kerr was the lone striker when it should have been Fleming up with her. The first 45 minutes for Chelsea were quite clear. Either launch the ball somehow to get to Sam Kerr's head or have Lauren James on it, which, might I say, Lauren James is absolutely terrifying. For the next 10 or so years, Lauren James is big trouble for anybody who's coming up against her and is a gem for whichever team she plays. And unfortunately, that didn't work in the first half. When they were pressing in a 4-4-2, they were looking so flat-footed purely because of how much Arsenal was able to control the midfield, but also because they were moving fast enough. Now, even when they were trying to launch the ball at Sam Kerr, there was no service around her, and there was no bodies to really aid that final third. The ball is right here in the air. I'm not sure if you can see it. But look at how much help Sam Kerr has. I mean, practically nothing. You've got Jessie Fleming pretty far behind, and she's got 3 Arsenal players behind her, so I'm not sure how that would have really helped. Emma Hayes bringing on Eve Paris and Kankiewicz was game-changing. They were able to bring in physicality and pace and almost courage to push through these Arsenal lines. They put Arsenal on the back foot for 10 to 15 minutes, and eventually that's how they got their goal in the late minutes of the game. Let's take a closer look at the goal here. This is the ball. Again, not the best picture that I could have grabbed, but that's the service going in from Kankiewicz to Kerr. And it's still the exact same goal that they were trying to do in the first half, but this time they have a lot more bodies and a lot more options for Kerr, meaning that drags Arsenal's defenders out of position. And I mean, this is not the best defending from Arsenal, but Sam Kerr is not marked. Could have been possibly because there's a player right here they're worried about. Could have been that there's 2 players sitting in, again, very dangerous positions on the side of the box. So having bodies in doesn't necessarily put you in a better position, but it puts your opponent in a worse position. Comparing those 2 screenshots that I just showed you right now, you could tell that's exactly how it is. Chelsea weren't in a better position. It was simply the Arsenal was in a worse position. There were less defenders marking the amount of blue shirts in the box. And if Sam Kerr is getting a ball on her head, you know damn well she's scoring, because Sam Kerr has the most amount of header goals in the entirety of the WSL. Like, history of the WSL. Mind you, she had only joined in 2020. Like, that is a ridiculous stat, and it shows you to the quality player that she is. I mean, Arsenal fans probably don't enjoy playing against her at all because it's always her against them. She can score headers, she's fast, Sam Kerr is Sam Kerr. There's not much to talk about it, but this is where you've got individual brilliance, those moments making up for the lackluster 70 minutes that your team just had. And that sounds a little bit harsh saying that the team had a very poor 70 minutes, but they kind of did. If it wasn't for that individual brilliance and the substitutions that Emma Hayes was able to very meticulously plan, I'm afraid they would have not equalized. They put Arsenal on the back foot. Arsenal didn't have the right attitude to go back at them, and that's momentum. You can lose it and you can have it so quickly. In a game like this with very small margins against Chelsea, anything can happen in any moment. Chelsea walks away happy with the result, disappointed in the performance, and Arsenal walks away happy with the performance but disappointed in the result. But that's just the name of the game sometimes. The two teams are always pretty much neck to neck. I mean, the last 2 WSL meetings between both of them have also ended in a draw, so it just shows you how close it is. Arsenal had the chance to win it. They made this a little bit tighter for them now in the title race, but for us fans, it just makes it a lot more interesting. I want to know your thoughts on this. Again, a very great game. I, as a neutral, had a lot of fun watching it, a lot of fun dissecting it down even. If you can notice, I'm also wearing a London shirt, my London shirt that I bought in London. I have both an Arsenal and a Chelsea jersey, but in a draw, you just have to rep both teams, right? If you want to stay updated and to continue enjoying the beautiful game, make sure you subscribe to me here on YouTube and follow me on Twitter. I will see you later.